When I first moved into that little apartment complex, I didn't think much of it. The place was quiet, tucked away from the busy streets, with only a handful of tenants scattered across 2 floors. I was 23, still learning how to live on my own, and honestly, I was just grateful the rent didn't eat me alive. It was on my very first afternoon there that I met her. I was struggling up the narrow stairwell, arms full of grocery bags, when I heard a voice behind me. Low, amused, and just a touch playful. "Careful, boy. I might just steal your firsts." The words made me freeze. My head turned, and that's when I saw her for the first time. She was standing 1 step below me, leaning casually against the railing, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Her eyes, sharp yet softened with something I couldn't quite place, held mine longer than felt ordinary. She looked to be in her early 40s, with that kind of beauty that doesn't shout for attention but pulls you in quietly, like a song you've never heard but instantly recognize. I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond, and nearly dropped one of the bags. She stepped forward without hesitation, catching it before it tumbled, her hand brushing mine. The contact was brief, but it sent a ripple of awareness through me I hadn't expected. Her perfume lingered in the small stairwell, subtle and elegant, floral, with a trace of warmth that matched her presence. "You're new here," she said, holding the bag against her hip. "You look too young to be weighed down with all this responsibility already." I swallowed, suddenly too aware of how unsteady I felt. "Yeah, just moved in upstairs. Apartment 2B. Her smile widened, but there was something almost bittersweet in it. "I'm across the hall. Looks like we'll be neighbors." The way she said it, casual, yet carrying an unspoken promise, lodged itself in my chest. She insisted on helping me carry the rest of my groceries, brushing off my protests with a wave of her hand. As we walked up together, her shoulder brushed against mine in the cramped stairwell, light as a whisper, but enough to make me aware of every inch of space between us. At my door, she handed me the bag and gave me a parting glance that lingered just a heartbeat too long. "Welcome to the building," she said softly, her voice dipping lower, almost like a secret. Then, with that same half-playful smile, she added, "Don't say I didn't warn you." And then she was gone, her door closing gently across the hall, leaving me standing there with groceries in hand and my pulse racing far faster than it should have been. I had just met my neighbor, a divorced woman, radiant and untouchable in ways I couldn't begin to explain. And from that very first moment, I knew nothing about her, nothing about us was going to feel ordinary. The next few days slipped by quietly, though I found myself thinking about her more than I wanted to admit. Every time I passed her door, I remembered that teasing smile, the way her hand had brushed mine in the stairwell. It was ridiculous. She was my neighbor, someone far older, wiser, someone whose presence carried a weight I couldn't yet understand. And still, I couldn't shake her from my mind. Then one evening, just as the sun was beginning to set, I heard a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, there she was, the woman from across the hall. This time she wasn't leaning in the stairwell or teasing me with playful words. She simply held up a pair of mugs, steam curling into the hallway air. "I thought you might like some company," she said. "Coffee tastes better when it's shared." I followed her across the hall, and she led me through her apartment to the balcony. It was small but cozy, with 2 chairs pulled close together and potted plants lining the railing. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from somewhere nearby. We sat down, and for a while, there was only the sound of the city in the distance. Muffled traffic, a dog barking faintly, the rustle of leaves. She cradled her mug between her hands, and in that moment, I noticed the tiniest tremor in her fingers before she steadied herself. She started talking, not with the teasing tone she'd used before, but with an openness that surprised me. She spoke about her life, how she'd grown up in a noisy household, how she once dreamed of traveling but never quite got around to it. And then, slowly, she touched on her divorce. Her voice dipped lower when she mentioned it. Not bitter, not angry, just a quiet kind of tired. "You get used to being strong for so long," she said, staring into her coffee. "But there are nights when the silence feels heavier than anything else." I listened, every word sinking into me. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound clumsy, but I wanted her to know I was listening, that I cared. At one point, as she set her mug down, her knee brushed against mine under the small table. It was the faintest contact, but I felt it like a spark, sharp and unexpected. I froze, waiting for her to pull away, but she didn't. She just kept talking, as though the touch was natural, as though it was meant to be there. Her laughter returned a little later, lighter now, as if a weight had been eased by saying the words out loud. And when she laughed, I couldn't help but notice how the corners of her eyes softened, how her whole face seemed to relax. By the time we finished our coffee, the sky had slipped into shades of violet and gold. She leaned back in her chair, looking out at the horizon. "You'll get used to this view," she said quietly. Then she glanced at me with a half-smile, softer than before. "It's better when you're not looking at it alone." I carried those words with me long after I went back to my apartment, long after I closed my door for the night. Somehow, in just one evening, the space between us didn't feel quite so wide anymore. It happened on one of those nights when the weather seemed determined to turn the whole world upside down. The rain came suddenly, heavy and unrelenting, sheets of water blurring the streetlights and rattling against the windows. I was on my way back from a late errand when I spotted her, my neighbor, standing in the parking lot, struggling to juggle her grocery bags while the storm soaked her to the bone. Without thinking, I ran to her. "Here, let me—" Before I could finish, one of the paper bags split open at the bottom, apples spilling out onto the wet pavement. She laughed, exasperated but graceful even in the chaos, rain clinging to her hair and running down her face. I bent down beside her, scooping up what I could. Our hands collided over the same apple, and for a second we just froze there in the downpour, both of us laughing at how ridiculous it was. By the time we got upstairs, we were drenched. My shirt clung to me like a second skin, and her blouse was plastered against her shoulders. She pushed open her door and ushered me inside. "Sit down before you catch a cold," she said, tossing me a towel. Her voice was firm but not unkind, the way someone speaks when they're used to looking after others. We ended up side by side on her couch, each with a towel draped over us, hair still dripping. The rain hammered against the balcony glass, loud enough to make the world outside feel distant, like it was just the two of us in that small, warm space. She sighed softly, pressing the towel against her hair. Then, almost without warning, she spoke. "You know, I haven't let myself feel wanted in years." The words stopped me cold. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, her voice barely above the rhythm of the storm. It was a confession, one that seemed to slip out against her better judgment. I didn't know how to answer. My throat felt tight, but I could feel the weight of what she wasn't saying, the loneliness behind her confidence, the quiet ache she carried. Her hand was resting on the couch between us, and without thinking, mine drifted close enough that our fingers almost touched. She noticed. For a second, I thought she'd pull away, but instead, her hand lingered, trembling just slightly as if undecided. The warmth of her skin, even through the dampness, traveled up my arm and lodged deep in my chest. It wasn't just attraction. It was something heavier, something that demanded patience. She let out a shaky laugh, shaking her head. Listen to me, pouring my heart out to a boy who barely knows me. But I wanted to know her, more than I had ever wanted to know anyone. The storm outside raged on, but inside, sitting close enough to feel the heat radiating between us, I realized the storm wasn't only outside. It was right here, between her heart and mine. My birthday came quietly that year. I hadn't told anyone in the building, and I didn't plan to make anything of it. 24 wasn't a milestone, just another number, and truthfully, I expected to spend the evening alone with takeout and maybe a movie. But when I came home from work, there it was. A soft knock at my door, and her voice calling gently from the hall. "Open up, birthday boy." I blinked, surprised. I hadn't told her, at least not that I remembered. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a small cake, barely bigger than her hands, topped with a single flickering candle. "How did you?" She smiled, that teasing spark back in her eyes. "I have my ways. Besides, neighbors talk." She stepped past me, setting the cake down on my table as though she belonged there. And before I knew it, she was pulling 2 wine glasses from a bag and uncorking a bottle she'd brought with her. "Sit," she said with a playful authority. "You're not allowed to celebrate alone." I obeyed, still dazed, as she lit the candle again and slid the cake toward me. "Make a wish," she said softly. Her eyes caught the candlelight in a way that made my chest tighten. I closed mine, not daring to wish out loud what I really wanted. When I blew out the flame, she clapped her hands lightly, then poured the wine. "To first birthdays away from home," she said, raising her glass. Then, with that same mischievous smile, she added, "See? I warned you. Stealing another one of your firsts." We both laughed, but there was something underneath her words, something unspoken, fragile. We ate the cake in comfortable silence, the sweetness of the frosting lingering on my tongue. At one point, as I fumbled with a crumb at the corner of my mouth, she reached out without thinking. Her fingers brushed gently against my lips as she wiped it away, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Her touch was light, almost accidental, but it left me frozen, pulse racing. Her hand withdrew slowly, lingering in the air as though reluctant to leave, before she tucked it back into her lap. "You've got a kind heart," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Don't lose that." Something about the way she said it, soft, wistful, made me wonder what parts of her past had stolen pieces of her own. The rest of the evening passed in a kind of golden haze. The wine warmed my chest, her laughter filled the room, and though nothing happened beyond cake and conversation, I felt like I had been given a gift much larger than I deserved. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door, her hand on the frame. For a moment, she just looked at me, eyes lingering, lips parting as if she wanted to say something more. But then she only whispered, "Happy birthday," and slipped into the hallway. And just like that, she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth of her laughter, and the echo of a touch I couldn't forget. It happened late one evening, after we'd run a quick errand together. She had asked me to help her carry a few things from the corner store, and I didn't hesitate. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just bags of fruit, some bread, a bottle of wine. But walking beside her through the quiet streets, I found myself noticing the little things again. The way her steps were unhurried, how she carried herself with that calm confidence that made everything around her feel steady. The air was cool, touched with the faint scent of rain from earlier in the day. We laughed about something trivial, the kind of small talk that didn't matter but somehow made me feel closer to her. And before I realized it, we were standing at her door. She shifted the bags in her arms and turned to me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The hallway was quiet, except for the low hum of a light bulb and the soft rhythm of her breathing. I should have said good night. I should have stepped back, given her space. But instead, I stayed there, caught in the gravity of her presence. Her eyes met mine, steady and searching, and I felt the air between us change, thickened, charged with something unsaid. She tilted her head just slightly, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. I realized then how close we were standing. My hand brushed hers as I reached to take the last bag from her arms. My fingers lingered, trembling, and I knew she felt it because she didn't pull away. Time seemed to stretch. My chest rose and fell too quickly, my heart racing so hard I was afraid she'd hear it. And then she leaned in. Only an inch, maybe less, but enough to make my breath catch. I could feel the warmth of her so close, the faint scent of her perfume wrapping around me like a quiet snare. Her eyes flickered down toward my lips, then back to my eyes. And just when I thought the world might close that distance for us, she stopped. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't know how dangerous this is." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Maybe I do." Her lips curved, not into a smile but something softer, sadder. She pulled back just a fraction, her hand brushing my arm before falling away. The spell broke, leaving the space between us wide again, though my heart still thudded against my ribs like it hadn't noticed. She unlocked her door slowly, as if reluctant to end the moment. Before stepping inside, she glanced at me once more, her eyes heavy with things unspoken. "Good night," she murmured, and the door closed gently behind her. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the wood grain of her door, every nerve in my body still alive with the ghost of what almost happened. It hadn't been a kiss, but it had been close enough to change everything. The days after that almost kiss were heavy with silence. I'd gotten used to seeing her almost daily, in the stairwell, on the balcony, or sharing coffee late into the evening. But now her door stayed closed. No soft knocks, no teasing remarks, no small excuses to pull me into her world. At first, I told myself it was nothing. She was busy. Life happens. But as the hours stretched into days, the distance became impossible to ignore. Every time I passed her door, I felt the weight of absence pressing against me. Finally, on the third night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I found myself knocking, hesitant, two quick taps that echoed louder than I intended. For a long moment, there was no sound. Then the door creaked open. She stood there, her hair pulled back loosely, a tired expression in her eyes. She looked at me as though she'd been expecting this but wished she hadn't. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Then why does it feel like I should?" The words came out before I could stop them. Her lips parted, then pressed together again. She stepped aside slowly, letting me in. The apartment was dim, only the glow of a single lamp casting soft light across the room. She sat on the edge of the couch, arms folded tightly across her chest. I sat across from her, unsure of how close I was allowed to be. Finally, she spoke. "You don't understand. People talk. A woman my age, a divorcee, seen with someone like you? They call me desperate. They call you foolish. I don't want to be someone's mistake." Her voice cracked at the last word, and she looked down, as though ashamed of her own honesty. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, trying to catch her gaze. "You're not a mistake. Not to me." Her arms tightened around herself, as if she didn't believe it, or maybe because she wanted to but was afraid. So I did the only thing I could. I reached across the small space and laid my hand gently over hers. She flinched at first, but didn't pull away. Her fingers trembled beneath my touch, and then, slowly, cautiously, they curled around mine. That single act carried more weight than 1,000 words. Her walls, the ones she had built brick by brick over years of loneliness, cracked just enough to let me in. She lifted her eyes to mine, tears glimmering but unshed. "You don't know what you're asking for," she whispered. "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I know what I feel when I'm with you. And I know I don't care what anyone else thinks." For the first time in days, she didn't look away. She just sat there, our hands joined, letting the silence stretch into something fragile and sacred. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about rushing forward or demanding more. It was about showing her that she was wanted, seen, and safe. The walls hadn't crumbled entirely, but they had cracked, and for us that was enough. The next evening, the air carried the soft hush of summer. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, and the sky glowed with a quiet kind of beauty, streaks of orange fading into violet. Her door was open when I stepped into the hall, as though she'd been waiting. She leaned against the frame, arms folded loosely, but her expression was gentler than it had been in days. "Come on," she said softly, tilting her head toward the balcony. I followed her out into the fading light. 2 chairs sat side by side, close enough that the armrests nearly touched. She lowered herself into one, and I took the other. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just watched the sun sink slowly below the horizon, the silence thick but not uncomfortable. Finally, she broke it. "You're stubborn, you know that?" Her voice was quiet, almost affectionate. "Most people would have given up on me by now." "Maybe I don't want to give up," I said. She gave a small, wistful laugh, shaking her head. "Maybe I don't want you to." Her words hung in the air, fragile and real. I glanced at her, and for the first time, she wasn't hiding behind a teasing smile or careful composure. She looked tired, yes, but also open, as if the weight she carried had finally grown too heavy to hold alone. The silence returned, but it was different this time. Comforting, heavy with everything neither of us had said aloud. And then, without a word, she shifted closer. Her shoulder brushed mine, warm and steady. Slowly, carefully, She leaned against me, her head resting lightly against my chest. I froze for a moment, caught off guard, then let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Her arms slipped gently around my waist, not tight, not desperate, just enough to anchor herself there. I wrapped an arm around her in return, pulling her in as though she belonged in that space. The world seemed to quiet around us. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city, the rustle of leaves, and the steady rhythm of her breathing syncing with mine. She spoke softly, her words muffled against my chest. Maybe I did steal a few of your firsts, but you've given me something back. Something I thought I'd lost a long time ago. I held her closer, not needing to ask what she meant. The answer was there in the way she leaned into me, in the softness of her hair brushing against my jaw, in the warmth of her body pressed gently to mine. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The embrace said everything words couldn't. As the last light of the sun slipped away and the sky deepened into twilight, I realized this wasn't just the end of something fragile and forbidden. It was the beginning of something real, tender, steady, and quietly extraordinary. And in that stillness, with her in my arms, I knew that nothing about us would ever feel ordinary again.